We all know well and are pretty familiar with what Extension does. At times, it seems that we've begun to lose sight of that land grant mission, though. That third pillar of Extension is utilized to reach public. It is defined as reaching out and extending university research and resources to meet public needs through non-formal educational programs at the community level. We do this through translating science for practical application, identifying emerging research questions, find answers, and encourage application of science and technology to improve ag, economic, and social conditions. We prepare people to break the cycle of poverty, encourage helpful lifestyles, and prepare youth for responsible adulthood. We provide rapid response regarding disasters and emergencies, and pretty much most importantly, we connect people to information and assistance. A lot of this is available online. However, Extension provides that liaison to give that knowledge to people firsthand. So, basically, Extension is utilized to disseminate information. Historically, this has been completed through people with a passion to talk. We all know Extension personnel generally are pretty outgoing. They like to talk to people, and it makes them really good at their jobs. Those who may not be as heavily research-minded are generally sometimes those in Extension. However, they do understand the research. Maybe it's not that they want to spend all day working in that research setting, which makes them enjoyable and productive Extension specialists. One method that they utilize to disseminate this information is implementing Extension programs. So Extension programming, while we hear this term used a lot, most of those cases it's actually being misused. Extension programs is a term that is loosely used to reference short talks, workshops, presentations, meetings, and then some youth projects. However, the problem is that these are not always programs. A program is defined by Boyle, who developed one of the main program models used today, as a product resulting from all activities in which a professional educator and learner are involved. For example, it would include needs analysis planning, instruction, promotion, evaluation, and reporting. Sievers and Graham have a more simplified definition of a comprehensive approach to addressing an issue with education. So, basically, programs must have planning, design and implementation, and informed evaluation. It's what makes a program different from all of those other methods, such as workshops, presentations, short courses, because they work off of informed evaluation. They have some type of evaluation tool, and that tool is utilized to make that program effective and last long term. So, in more recent years, even though Extension programs have been an adopted practice for decades, we're starting to see that these programs are becoming more prevalent, and a lot more Extension specialists are utilizing the program method instead of simple workshops, talks, and day activities. But why is it that they have been around for so long and we're just now seeing a huge rise in their prevalence? One of these reasons could be the shift in Extension specialist. Your Extension specialist, while the job of being the liaison and the ground workers to meetings and educate individual farmers and the public about agriculture has not changed, much of the training for these specialists have. They seem to be more apt to utilize hard data and research. They're a lot more comfortable with data collection, such as the evaluation phases that we see in programs. Therefore, we do notice that more extension specialists have been implementing programs and utilizing that data mining process. However, a major reason we see more programming utilized is due to funding. That fun word that we all like to try to avoid, obviously, especially in your university settings. In more recent years, extension specialists have been more tasked in proving their worth. So unfortunately, we all know all too well why extension is important. Extension is extremely important because we're basically the hands and feet, those that disseminate that information, that educate that farmer, and allow an industry to surpass other industries in their ability to provide the world with a need with only about 2% of that population. However, it can be very difficult to document the return on investment. When we're talking about workshops put on for 5 to 10 farmers, or maybe an all-day meeting where we're discussing topics and educating a single farmer, it's a little bit hard for us to document a return on that investment, simply because that bean counting method that we see a lot of times where numbers matter doesn't really match up on the return on investment. There's also just a general misunderstanding from an administrational level. A lot of administration, since only 2% of that population are not directly tied to ag production, they don't understand its importance and its value. We also see, obviously, the reduced number of farmers, and therefore a lot of your political platforms feel that agriculture is not as relevant as it used to be, simply because you don't have the manpower, you don't have the numbers there. So all of these lead to more competitive or more competition for governmental funding and federal grants, whereas extension programs used to be fully funded and that grant funding came from separate entities. That's no longer the case. And it's also resulted in major funding cuts. So this makes extension program imperative by collecting data through evaluation and being able to illustrate their effectiveness. Again, this is probably why we see a huge rise in it, because those faculty that do have to implement extension or work directly in extension are now working diligently to prove their effectiveness. So while we in extension know educating one farmer truly impacts thousands, even millions of the public, the need to provide evidence of extension's worth is leading to a necessity to reach broader populations through programs, especially future generations. Even though the meetings have to happen to educate that single farmer, we must start to shift and begin to attempt to reach larger populations of youth to plant the seeds of importance of ag and what it means to their future. That way, regardless of where they end up in adulthood and what jobs they are tasked with, they see its importance and value. So maybe we're reaching a population of students that will never have a future in agriculture, may not directly work in poultry specifically. However, they may be that same person that decides on the funding federally or that implements something in their classroom. So, how do we actually reach and engage this younger generation? First, we must acknowledge they are not us. Not only do they live in a much faster-paced society, it's driven by technology, but this world we live in has now molded their personalities into much different people than we as older generations are. I'd like to think that I'm still young, but when I get out there and I work in extension, I realize just how old I've gotten. And I am fairly disconnected from these younger generations. We can all relate to some extent when we look back on being so misunderstood by parents or grandparents in that adolescent phase. And we really have to hone in on that when we think about how do we reach these younger populations. The same can be held true with all of these newer generations as well. They have that same mentality where us older generations who are trying to connect on that playing field of ag extension can't really relate to them. So before we focus on reaching them through extension and how to improve our ability to get them involved, we have to understand who we are attempting to reach. So Gen Z and your Gen Alpha are your two youngest populations. So those are going to be your youth, those that are going to enter or may have just entered the workforce straight out of high school, but also sit in those K through 12 classrooms. If we look at your Gen Z and your Gen Alpha, they are technology driven. This isn't just meaning they want to live behind a screen and having 4 young kids at home. I do feel like that's really what they live for, is to live behind a screen. However, it means that they have fast-paced thinking methods. Everything has to be readily available to them. Their method of socializing are using social platforms. So where we maybe walked out the front door and found our friends, their friends are always at their fingertips. The way that they communicate and socialize is through technology. This is also seen through their methods of learning. They learn through social learning. It's important to note that technology is a really important way of communication. Maybe it's not how we teach, but it's probably how we need to communicate with these individuals. Utilizing technology as a platform to draw in the public or that youth experience to get them involved. However, they do learn socially. They like to be in groups. They like to learn in large populations of their co-peers. They enjoy co-creating. This can be done through projects. They're also bite-sized learners. I don't know if anyone's noticed the attention span of your youth, but it is very short. We're even starting to see models in the classroom where instead of standing and lecturing for an hour, it's supposed to be a 5 to 10 minute platform. So they want those notes and then a 5 to 10 minute blurb of the highlights, and then to allow them to sit with their peers and conversate on those. These youth have become bite-sized learners because everything is at their fingertips. That technology has taken over. We can have everything readily available quickly. Therefore, they don't want to sit and listen for an hour to an educational setting. They also want immersive, adaptive technology. So we're starting to see a lot of that VR pop up, that virtual reality, because they like to be in and immersed. Best practices are to use micro-learning and experiential learning, which is that hands-on learning with these K through 12 learners. So one method that's proven to be effective for us at Mississippi State University is the Hatch Out program. Our Hatch Out program, while a lot of universities have Hatch Out programs, reaches approximately 8,000. We're probably on target to reach closer to 10,000 youth annually in Mississippi. And one of the reasons, or a couple of the reasons, that it seems to be very effective is because it provides that experiential learning, that hands-on learning component. It encompasses 30-minute lessons, so each day they only spend 30 minutes, and that includes their hands-on activity along with their lecture series and their curriculum. They also complete group activities with each one. Students aren't sitting and individually working on a project. These are all done as group activities where they can be creative and still encompass their unique ideas, but work with those in the classroom as a group. This generation, it's also noted that they like mentorship. So generally, it's always important to have somebody in that classroom. This project provides full curriculum for that teacher, so she can provide that mentorship. But we also have somebody, a specialist, go in on Fridays and speak with those students just so they can aid them in that thought process. So with the Hatch Out program, we provide a 5-day curriculum, and it consists of 30 minutes of hands-on group activities each day. They also have hatching eggs to encompass that immersive learning process. You can see in the middle, there's an incubator. I also discussed that this generation wants everything at their fingertips, and it has to be pretty fast-paced and bite-sized learning processes. Because of that, eggs are incubated all the way to 20 days because you lose that effectiveness when you put the eggs in the classroom for 20 days because they've lost that interest. So eggs are actually put in the classroom on Monday, they hatch on Tuesday, they get to watch that process, and each curriculum component focuses on what happens in those days. So you can see there's the hatching process. They will actually look at hatch. They can collect data for the older kids, and the younger ones go through a whole process and make the life cycle of a chicken wheel. They talk about safety and biosecurity. That activity is the one you see in the top corner. That's cups of sand. So each cup has a different color of glitter. They all sit in their group, and each one has a farm. So their glitter represents their poultry farm. They'll play in their poultry farm. They'll visit their neighbor's poultry farm. They'll go to a central farm located, maybe that's Walmart or the grocery store. They'll walk around and play in it. And at the end of that activity, it shows the importance of biosecurity because now we have every color glitter in our sandbox, which represents that biosecurity, keeping our farm safe and also keeping your neighbors safe. One of the last projects that they do is build a farm. So they've spent the whole week looking at that curriculum and that process of poultry farming, and now they get the opportunity to build a farm. So they're given good things and bad things to put into that farm, and at the end, they should have built a correct coop with clean feed, chicks. Your chicks in the bottom corner are actually sitting on a starburst, so they are taught to eat that chicken. We're not just raising them to have as pets. So they eat their starburst at the end of that activity. Throughout the research that we've collected on this, utilizing program models, we have been able to show effectiveness. So pre and post test and long-term collection of post education does show an increase in knowledge gained. So kindergarten, first, and second grade was collected. We've shown a 69, 67, and 69% increase of knowledge in that pre-test versus that post-test, just with 5 30-minute activities. And that education is also kept long-term. Second method that we've utilized at Mississippi State that has been really effective with students, your Gen Z, is summer poultry camps. So our summer poultry camp has been effective in 2 years. We've done it 2 times so far, and we've had really good positive turnouts. We've also been able to show an increase in knowledge. It's a 5-day on-site camp. It is not overnight. I haven't jumped off that far yet and stayed overnight with these kids. They have wanted to. That is one of the feedbacks we get, is that parents and kids really want that overnight camp, but I just haven't done it yet. They do on-site activities at Mississippi State, so they're in our labs. They're getting to do all the different, or see all the different components of what we do on a research side. We partnership with a local elementary school, so these are actually summer camps. They offer multiple. They encompass learning methods that are targeted to that Gen Z and that Alpha generation, though, with all the hands-on learning activities, group projects, and they come in real short snippets. So our projects, generally we'll do 8 and 9 projects in a day, where we're only spending 10 to 15 minutes on each of those projects. So why have these been effective extension programs for MSU? Extension programming utilized to assess learning outcomes and effectiveness has been utilized. So we've been able to collect data, modify and adopt changes based on the needs of that learner. And they've also utilized teaching techniques that fit the current generation style of learning. So we use that hands-on experiential learning. We make sure to keep lessons very short. Everything has group projects that allow for that co-creative learner, and all are very immersive and adapt to that learning style. So in conclusion, extension program is needed. We have to have that programming model utilized in what we do nowadays. Unfortunately, we can't just walk out to a farm, have those conversations, and gain the respect that these programs work and that we're reaching the populations and that funding is well spent. We have to show and illustrate that value of extension to those that are unaware or uneducated in the area, which is why programming is of utmost importance. We also have to work to boost enrollment, and this can be accomplished through new creative ways of learning, specifically modified to reach these newer generations. The old methods that we utilized don't effectively work with those new generations. So we do have to modify our methods in how we teach those learners. Some future areas of focus that I do want to just hit on before I wrap up. VR implementation. While some data that we've collected over the years, specifically in 2017 and 2019, have noted that even though we feel that these generations are extremely technology driven, they do still want that face-to-face interaction. VR methods are one of those ways to encompass both of those. To be able to give them that immersive technology feel, but still have that relevant face-to-face connection. So VR implementation in kids is probably something that's going to be a very effective method soon. Right now it's pretty expensive. I don't know if anyone's ever dabbled in VR, but it is a pretty expensive model, not only to create, but also to put into classrooms. So the picture you see here, this is a disposable VR model that we can put in classrooms. However, it still costs you about $25 per student. Also, service project engagements with mentorships is something that an area that we probably need to hone in and focus on with these students. K through 12, these generations like to feel worth and value in what they do. So if you can bring some type of community service, mentorship project into that, it seems to be a very effective method. So not just teaching them about where their food comes, but the purpose of what ag does and why it's important. Letting them immerse themselves into that and feeling that they've accomplished something, they gain value from that. So with that, I'm going to wrap up, and hopefully I have about 2 minutes for questions. So if anyone has any questions.